Right then, here we go. I've been talking to Hugh recently, every day actually, but we've been talking about some sort of particular stuff recently where obviously we've all got a little bit more time at home on our hands, not going out gigging, seeing people, going to events, any old other shit that you tend to do when you've got freedom. And we've sort of mentioned about going through some project files, walkthroughs, feedback for demos, that type of activity. So I thought I'd have a bit of a trial run and see how I get on taking you through this project file, which is System F Out of the Blue Akira Kayosa remix, which is now 14 years old, unbelievably. I sort of produced this on an older version of Reason, so as we sort of go through and do the walkthrough, you'll see some quite quirky things. Not a lot of people use Reason within the trance field. I know a lot of people do use it; it's a great program, but not a lot of people do use it in the trance remit side of things. Some of it will translate, some of it won't. For those of you that are interested, great. For those of you that are not, I don't fucking care. If you're watching this, you're at least a little bit interested in how the track was put together. So I'll bumble my way through, and we'll see how we get on. You might say, Russ, this is a load of wank. Why did you bother putting this video together? And you might just think, actually, that's quite interesting. Amongst all the shit that he talks, there's some useful stuff in there for me. If not, well, like I said, we move on. So looking at the track in general, I guess first before I start, a little bit around the track in particular. So this, I'd become pretty good friends with Hugh at this point already. Hugh taught me a good amount about using Reason, as well as a guy called Mike Franklin. Me and Hugh met on the tidy boards, I think, a long, long time ago when we were little nippers. And we sort of struck up an instant friendship from there, and we got talking back and forth. Obviously, we started, writing, producing tunes together, and here we are now. We're actually currently working on our debut album. Reason has always been a staple of our production process, probably more so on the creative side now, the idea generation, rather than actually producing tracks from start to finish. When we're feeling lazy or the track just is right in Reason, we'll leave it in there and we'll sort of produce it in its entirety. But more often than not now, we tend to do the creative and the idea generation in Reason, and we'll finish the tracks, we'll produce them, produce the records in Cubase. Many reasons really. Reason is more than capable, but the key thing is, from a finished product standpoint, we can just get a better result in Cubase. Sound engine, everything, it just sounds so much better when it's done that way, we've found. So we still use it all the time. It's absolutely seamless for sending files back and forth. It's self-contained nature. You can have third-party plugins in there now, VSTs, etc. Back in the day, and even this file here, looking at it now, this is all Reason. There is nothing in here outside of Reason at all. It's all the host engine stuff, samplers, Maelstrom, Subtractor, combinators, etc. Combinators, just before we sort of move on, it's a little device that allows you to stack and batch and combine various different host synth processing units and stuff within Reason, and it was a very sort of key tool for us to sort of build big sort of patches of pads, leads, anything really that needed multi-layers, and then you could combine them and save them as a unique patch, which is very effective, and we did that quite a lot. So yeah, anyway, going back to the Out of the Blue remix in particular, I produced this in 2006, and interestingly, it didn't actually get picked up for quite some time. It didn't get released until 2010. In between 2006 and 2010, I did a couple more remixes. I did Legato with Adam Kopak, and I did a remix of Vimana We Came that got picked up on Black Hole and played by Ferry and everyone else. And I think that was really the sort of trigger for Ferry going back and revisiting this and then releasing it on Premiere, I believe it came out on. I think in the end, this remix became really successful. Ferry put it on his BBC Radio One Essential mix, as well as loads of other shite. But it was interesting. I gave a copy of this to Ferry in 2007, a CD copy in Auckland, New Zealand, and I'm not too sure if he ever played it or not. But it did take some time for it to actually get picked up by him and played by a few of the people. What I will say is that JFK at Passion in the UK was one of the first real heavy supporters, and he sort of championed it across the clubs and whatnot. So the remix in itself was quite a success and a bit of a step up for me in terms of my production and I guess my profile as well. A lot of it was by chance, to be honest with you, because although this file is really well put together, and you can see that I'm reasonably going down the path of I guess maturing my techniques and my sound and where I want to go in terms of my productions. It was still very early, in where I was at, and a lot of the success from this file was more so chance than ability at the time. Might be underselling myself a little bit there, but I think that's just matter of fact. I think if we was to probably ask Hugh, he'd say the same thing, but no. So that's a little bit about the track. It's first sort of conceived in 2006, not properly released until 2010, still getting played today, got played by the original guy himself. What more can I say? The reason why I remixed the track, and a little bit controversial, I was never a massive fan, a huge fan. I've got the track on vinyl here behind me, and I love everything Ferry's ever done. He's a pioneer of the scene, etc. Not just trance, but dance music in general. I always felt there could be a more energetic remix of Out of the Blue. I felt the original was quite ploddy in nature, and although it's a big trance anthem, I felt there could be something that was a little bit more energetic. So that's why I wanted to put my spin on it. More often than not, there are certain tracks that shouldn't be touched, they shouldn't be remixed because they're just perfect. This just falls into that category, but I think the way that me and Hugh often approach our classic remixes, it's more sort of refurbishment and refinement rather than complete rehaul and often utter destruction. People absolutely muller remixes of classic tracks when they try and do them, and you sort of sit there and listen and you think, oh, fucking hell, why did you try that? Because it's absolute shit. Some tracks are just perfect from the get-go, but I really did feel that I could add something to this one, and I guess the results speak for themselves. We're very particular about which classic tracks which we will often remix, and I think we've got a bit of a back catalogue now for our style and approach of how we will touch certain things. But this was, I guess, one of those sort of early template approaches for that sort of ethos and theory for how we approach the classic remix jobs that we do. So let's have a look a little bit around the file. I'm not too sure, like what I'm doing here particularly, but I just want to take you through, how I sort of put the track together. Firstly, we'll look at some of the sounds, but just from an overall arrangement standpoint, you can see here how I laid it out. I think we're around about a 9-minute or so track here, so it's quite a long one, certainly in comparison to some of the stuff that gets put out today. We have attention spans of sparrows, and tracks these days are about 5.5 minute long. So this one being over 9 minutes is a bit of a certainly a bit of an old school vibe. But the way that the remix was put together, a track like this can't sort of accelerate to the point. It has to take its time, in my eyes and my version of events. So, and that's why it's over 9 minutes. But you can sort of get a bit of an overview here as I scroll for the arrangement of the track. So let's have a listen to some of the sounds. So I sort of pulled up the browser bar here for some of the stuff that I used. So going back to the nature of how Reason was at the time, it's very much host application stuff only, no third-party plugins. So it would have all been samples and hardware. So amazingly, the stuff that's in here is quite limited. So we'll have a bit of a browse through, kick drum, etc. Some of the perk stuff from A Vengeance, Club Sounds 1 by the sound of it. Bit of an alley and feeler style clap there. That's obviously the bongo roll that comes in later on. Got some more kick drums there, probably didn't use those because that is the kick. Complete contrast in loops there, surprisingly, but obviously I must have sort of chopped them up. So there's some of the effect sounds and some of the sort of the key sort of perk hits, etc. A bit of a fluttering acid type sound there. The main bassline stuff I would have pulled in from a piece of hardware. I probably used the Korg to record that. So within Cubase I would have recorded it and then pulled it into Reason, into a sampler, and just looped it. Same for the progressions and stuff. I'd record in the loop and then drop it in. So here's the actual JP. I've got a JP80 in my hardware collection, so you can hear the filter on it popping away now. I would have recorded in, this is before you could even drop audio into the sequencer page within Reason, so I would have recorded it in using Cubase, saved it, exported it out, got the file and put it into an N19. I would have just simply loaded it up like so, pulled it in, and then just drawn it in on the sequencer page. Pardon me, we can take a look at that in a minute. Quite a heavily detuned tight sound. I would always record stuff in dry and then add the processing afterwards, so maybe EQing, reverb, delay, etc. It's like the intro silver breast sound there, sub riff, you know, so that's, again, it's from the JP, you can tell, and the little sub riff sound there. That's taken, you know, that sort of notation's taken literally from the original. One of the things that I'm always really sort of keen on is you can sometimes pick up a MIDI for a main riff from a classic track. Depends who's put it together. Often they're wrong and a load of shite. So I like to just listen and get the notes down myself. You know, sometimes it'll take a bit of time. I'll sit at the keyboard and work it out. Same for the sub riffs as well. You know, the supporting sounds that Freddie would have used in the original track, I just listened and worked out what the notes were and then put them through my own JP and found a sound that was you know, just right. So that is pretty much the entirety of the sound set and the samples that I would have used for this track. Obviously some of them have been recorded myself, but for the most part it looks like it's a bit of a vengeance fest. So 2006, it's not too surprising. Yeah, so let's have a listen to see how some of these things sound stacked up together, shall we? So the drum track is quite robotic, but it does tend to work. It sort of chugs along quite nicely. The main factors here, and this is quite a small drum track to be honest with you, compared to the sort of the likes of stuff we do these days. Although the loops and stuff are quite heavily robotic, the main stuff that drives it is the clap, the ride, and the main hat. The rest of it sort of seeps into the background once it gets going, you know, and obviously the bass line and stuff, you know, sort of helps, you know, drive the thing. The bassline groove on this is quite particularly good, and there's a reason for it, but I remember at the time I was a really big fan of Tom Colantonio Rounder, which is in G also, and around about the same time, maybe a little bit before. So I was quite adamant that I wanted the bass to be sort of really smooth, warm and groovy, you know, against the kick drums, and I think I sort of achieved that. So you can sort of see the layering. Obviously there's a piece of hardware that's been pulled in. So what I was mentioning earlier on, you know, I just tend to loop the hardware that was recorded and drop it in on C1. So that's quite it's quite a smooth subby type of sound. But then the bass tops and the bass new tops, that adds the sort of the crisp, the bite on top of the bass sounds. They're quite sort of clean and smooth there, but with these on top, they just add a little bit more presence. You know what I mean? Just a little bit more spiciness on top. So, so the intro of the track, again, fairly straightforward on the sort of the perk side. We've got, it's a 4-set intro. You've got minimal sort of effects, bit of a fade down. We've got the gated pad, which sort of tinkers away nicely in the background. Just sort of lingers, and then we've got this little sample that I mentioned earlier on. Obviously it's not dry anymore, it's got a delay working on it. And that is pretty much the crux of the intro portion with the layering, and then we start to work in, you can sort of see the kick drum here. Obviously the sets of, there's 4 sets there, but then we start to work in sets of 64 beats of 2 sets, so we're working in sets of 2. And this track, like I mentioned earlier on, it doesn't sort of rush to the point. It really takes its time, starts to build slowly, and there's almost like there's a pre-build section to the actual pre-break section, because I really want to be sure of us sort of achieving that real sort of tension builder, and not quite sure, is this out of the blue? Is this an out of the blue remix? That was the sort of impact that I wanted it to have on the listener when it first sort of kicked in. With the musical elements of the track coming to the fore. Great little sound here. It's only a tiny little maelstrom, but the right amount of processing sounds really good. So here we're starting to build up. Most of the layers are coming in before we get to this sub build section here. A bit of an opening from clearing that opens up. But I remember these pieces working together nicely. So I sort of manually sort of automate. So these are audio samples that have gone in there directly from my JP, but I've just sort of, as you can see here, sort of crept up the cutoff on them every now and then, so it sort of has it cutting through in the mix. Again, it sort of harps back quite nicely to the original track as well, because these were quite big elements in the original tune. So this is the, once we get to the end of this build section here, this is the opening portion that I sort of spoke around. So there'll be a nice 2-step build here before we even get to the key progressions, and then we're sort of starting to get into the breakdown portion of it. This was a really big piece for me. This had to happen to sort of really built that tension, and it kept the listener guessing as to what this track might be. And obviously there's this T section, of the main riff, which has been introduced, which previously, there's a lot of elements that are going on that sound cool and, nicely put together, but nothing that really sort of relates into the out of the blue sort of vibe. And this is where, I sort of first start to tease in sub-melody style stuff that is close to, if not very, very aligned with the original riff from Out of the Blue. The ride and the main hat and the clap really cutting through nicely there. The rest of the stuff that I spoke about earlier on, sort of, it sort of fades to the background a bit, but once the elements of these things sort of kick in, it really sort of takes over. What I will say is, although this has been constructed in a certain way, a lot of it was sort of almost by chance, but it did set a new level in terms of my expectations on my overall finished product and the quality of the production. I obviously set out to do a remix, and it was really important to me that I nailed it and did it right. I didn't dream that I'd get it quite as spot on as this. And the next few tracks, they weren't exactly to this level, but it sort of showed me that there was something in the tank that I could sort of, aspire to and push on from once I was a lot more consistent at achieving something at this level. And that's just putting the remix to one side. I'm just talking about the production techniques and my approach. I was always really big on, I guess it's a bit of a trademark thing of me and Hugh, but I was particularly very big on making sure this had the full rinse out. It was completely washed out before it got to the breakdown. Sort of working in these sets of 64 beats. I even allowed for an extra 32, just the full rinse out. So when the strings do come in, there is no question. This is going to be really, really sort of building down, filter down. So from that section just there, when the pads come in, it's almost complete silence, and then we'll start. It really is quite a gorgeous sort of section of the track. Just the transition in general, that sort of portion of the whole record, the pause and the allowance of everything else sort of disappearing, so this moment can begin, type of thing. That the breakdown of the sort of the arrangement itself. It's pad lines that amalgamate with lead lines coming in, and then obviously it builds to that sort of climatic jizz fest moment a bit later on. But for me, this portion right here is the special one. And again, it's incredible to think really that none of this is VST. It's just all purely Reason, pads and stuff that we'd sort of developed over time. The sound sets, because we just didn't have the luxury of sort of opening up a VST with a massive patch bank of wonderful sounds. It's all stuff that we've had to craft and develop, ourselves. This is 2006. This isn't like 2020. This is 14 years ago. So we're sort of crafting and saving stuff and building up our toolkit, and that's one of the beauties of Reason. Really, it's a bit of a pain. It was a bit of a pain to begin with, because you sort of open up and have nothing in terms of raw sounds and files that you could use, but it would push you to develop and craft that toolkit. And I guess that's what sort of helped us shape a lot of our sounds and how we did things. Anyone that's sort of familiar with Reason will know the airbase patches that got released. They were pretty helpful in terms of the stacking and the processing that went into some of the combinator patches. Really helped me and Hugh sort of understand how we could develop our own stuff and layer and create big sounds as well. And a lot of the stuff that Jesper put together in those patches that he released for Reason, that they were sort of staples in a lot of our productions, to be honest with you, for quite a period of time. Lead sounds, bass lines, etc. Obviously, with the JP, it's not playing there when I'm dropping in the cursor at various points to play, because, like I mentioned earlier on, the whole recording would have to play through this point, and that's just one of the odd quirks of Reason. There's no way I could have dropped in the audio file into the sequencer back in the day, on this particular version of Reason. So that was a real sort of unique thing, and the amount of workarounds that you used to have to do for Reason was quite a pain, but somehow we just managed to get on with it and make it work. So here, obviously stuff starts to sort of straighten out in terms of the progressions. You can see, whereas previously stuff was sort of rotating and playing out its actual 64, here I start to straighten out and really rinse out the sounds. In terms of the build, introduce some perk stuff, some hits, a ride, and obviously here we've got the bongo roll, which I sort of laboured over for quite some time to get it just spot on right for this remix. I think I've almost introduced as well. just some bubbling acid as it starts to build, you know. There's simplified strings. Da, da, da. So it's all pretty nice. So as I mentioned earlier on, when I played some of the sample sets, the bongo roll. Oof, it sounds terrible on its own. It sounds absolute dog shit. But I did, really push myself quite some time to get this just right, especially on the note side as well. Because you're doing a remix of Out of the Blue. This is one of the key features of the original track, so it had to be just right. So on its own, it sounds absolutely terrible. But as things are building up, and it gets to that point within the track here where it kicks in my remix, sounds pretty good, if I will say so myself. And as the sort of the track kicks in, I mean, I won't go through it belts and braces, but I think anyone that's sort of watching this file is probably more than familiar with my remix of Out of the Blue. It kicks in full beans, all the drum tracks pretty much there, I think, apart from I know it is there, apart from the loops which come in later on. I think these would have distracted from the actual energy of the track somewhat, only a minute amount if they were in there full. So it sort of stripped out the clattery stuff and just let the high energy perks drive along with the track. Sounds pretty good, chugs along really well. Obviously we've got 3 rotations of 64, and as I mentioned earlier on, obviously the Out the Blue riff is 2 sets long, 64 beats. So that sort of plays out for the entirety. Things filter down here, and then it sort of drops out into this sort of pre-outro build section, I guess, where things get to sort of breathe again, and I guess it's where DJs and whatnot can start to think about mixing. Sort of retained some of those elements that were sort of introduced in the intro, but with the intro portion that we went over earlier on, and I had those pre-breakdown progressions that were a little bit different but closely aligned to the Out of the Blue theme. There's no need to repeat that in the outro. I mean, the main bulk of the track is done. You're not going to go over old ground repeating the intro portion of the track in the outro. Here you're just going to sort of serve the purpose of giving it a nice sort of exit from the main portion of the lead section, and then create the outro, the true outro piece for mixing and whatnot. Nice pause there just to sort of really break things up. There's this sort of lead out section here with a couple of sets, and then the final one just with beat, bass line, and the basic elements of the gate pad and some of the synth work, minimal effects, and then we get back into it again for the proper outro section. That's where some of that sort of clattery perk and whatnot comes back in again. But you can sort of see, I mean, in terms of the elements and the samples that I sort of showed at the start of the track, it is quite lean, to be honest with you. And this really sort of struggled to run on my PC back in the day. I'm actually showing you this on my laptop in my studio now. So it's amazing how far things have come in, even in the last sort of 14 years or so. I would never have dreamt of running this file on the laptop back in the day. It was on my old trusty tower. But now my laptop can sort of breeze through it, no problems at all. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm not too sure how these files are going to go down, if they're of any interest to anyone. You might think they're a load of wank, like I said before, and what's the point in putting them together? But I guess sort of a behind the scenes look on how some of the tracks that we've done were constructed, the layout. Like I said, we use Reason. It's quite unique. Not many people use Reason. We don't use it as much as we did before in terms of the finished product, but we still use it in everything that we do. And like I said, with us working on an album now, it's absolutely integral on the idea creation side of things and whatnot. This is truly an old school style file because of the complete Reason nature about it. There's no sort of third party plugins in there or anything. But you know, we're open to pulling in some of our newer stuff. If there's any tracks or productions that you'd like us to, do some sort of guided tours around how we achieve, some of our layering sounds. I haven't gone too deep on, the processing. I mean, this is quite an old file anyway, but I haven't gone too deep on, processing or mixing or anything like that. But just to give you a feel for, how this remix was put together. I thought this would be a fairly useful video. But by all means, you can let me know. If not, and as mentioned, me and Hugh will be more than willing to share the files, tips, techniques, while we're all sat at home, not being able to go out with our freedom. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. The track is available for a free download on my SoundCloud now. The guys at Flashover, Dance Therapy, etc. Once, a few years later, after 2010, I sort of asked if I could share it for free, and they were more than happy for me to do so. So it is available for a free download if you want to have a listen to the actual track and perhaps go back and look at this file, listening to me waffle a load of bullshit. Anyhow, take care. Speak to you soon.